My name is Roxanne Dubé, and I am a public health specialist here at Bangor Public Health and Community Services. My specialty area is tobacco prevention, and I've been in this role since 2017. Our funding is from Maine Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and it is contracted through Maine Health, who then subcontracts with local organizations like Bangor Public Health and puts our district tobacco prevention partners here in different organizations in all 16 counties. My service area for K through 12 schools is all of Penobscot and Piscataquis counties. I also come to you today with a lengthy background in the health and wellness field. I've done a lot of things in those areas and across the local community here in Penobscot County. I'm also a mom of 3 young adults and also a former school board member for 8 years. So that's what I'm bringing along with me today with this presentation. So I am going to close the waiting room, if that's okay with you. And we're going to get on with the introduction for my co-host today.
Hello, my name's Athena. I'm a senior at the University of Maine studying social work, and I've been interning at the Bangor Public Health and Community Service, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Athena. She's our technological guru today, so if something goes wrong, I am so happy she's here. Okay, so let me progress our slides here. We're going to start off with a poll question. And this poll is asking about your current beliefs about vaping, and it's a multiple choice. I want you to choose as many as apply. Okay. So the good news is we're a little all over the place, but most of you don't know enough at this time. So the good news is you are definitely in the right place. 36% are believing it's safer than alcohol and other drugs. 29% believe it can be a quit smoking option. Okay. And 0% of you have said that it's not an issue in your school community. So thank you. That is good to know. Electronic nicotine delivery systems. That's what we're talking about today. I'm going to refer to the products that we talk about today as vapes and vaping. And the reason I'm using that term is because when we asked Maine youth in 2019, that was the term they most frequently used. So it's important when we talk to talk about, use the language that youth are using. But they can be called a lot of other things, vape pens, mods, e-cigarettes, and even by their brand name, such as Juul or Juuling, whatever we call them, they're all the same devices. And I am going to spend time today, rather than talking about all of the devices, I'm going to talk about the 4th generation, or what's currently on the market, because that's probably what you will see the most of in your schools. I also want to point out, while I'm calling them vapes and referring them to them as vaping, they are not actually a vapor. And the tea kettle on your right, when it's heated up to a high temperature, will emit a water vapor. And the difference with a water vapor is that eventually it will mix with air and disappear. What's actually being emitted from these products is an aerosol. And the difference is an aerosol is ultrafine particles suspended in a gas. They will not mix with air and they will not disappear. So that particulate will show up somewhere. So now we have, this is an I Spy game for adults. This is I Spy, can you spy, and find all of the vape devices and parts in this picture. And this is a single best answer question, so I'd like you to choose the number that corresponds with the closest to the number that you found. Okay, we're almost there. Waiting for 4 of you to vote, 3. Okay. Well, the good news is no one chose 0 because obviously you can see some here, which is fantastic. The correct answer was actually 17. If you found over on the right side, there is a red pod cover that is partially in the picture. If you found that one, that would have been number 18, and that is a bonus point for the I Spy game. So the point of this, obviously, is in schools, we see them a lot. Parents, I have not yet found someone on the parent spectrum who can find correctly the devices here that are vaping products. And they are not on the radar of many adults. And also, they don't look like tobacco products. They look like other things that we use in everyday life. So I mentioned some of you may have missed the pod cover. If you're wondering what is in these pods, these new devices, this 4th generation that we're going to talk about today, typically have a container that holds what we're going to refer to today as an e-liquid. If you look at the breakdown on the left-hand side, there is a pod cover, and the cover usually comes in a different color depending on the flavor. The outer shell there is where the e-liquid is stored and is contained. Typically, regardless of the makeup of the device, there's a coil and a wick. This particular one is similar to a jewel pod. It has a gold-plated component here, contact point that will help the coil heat up. From the battery, there's a chimney, which is where the aerosol is inhaled through a rubber gasket and through the mouthpiece. So that's roughly how they work. They plug into, in this case, this one would plug into something that looks like a USB flash drive, like a Juul. And that's where the lithium-ion battery is. They can also look like other things. These ones here on the right, we're starting to see more like this. These are single-use disposable products. And you'll find out why when we talk about some regulation, why we're seeing a glut of these types of devices. They're meant to, they're not rechargeable. They have typically a lithium-ion battery in them, and they are meant to be used one time and then disposed of. On the right-hand side, you see, yes, you do, you see what looks like an inhaler. This is actually called the Puffet X, and if you can see closely, that black cap on the silver one there says Puffet X, and again, does not look like a tobacco product. It's designed to look like something else that has a different use. Something else that happened with the 4th generation of products is that there was a new technology that occurred. And we've moved from what's considered or called free-base nicotine, which is in things like cigarettes and a lot of the earlier vaping products, to something called nicotine salts. And it was a process that Juul specifically, that was their technology. They turned what nicotine, which is an alkaloid, which is very harsh, and they added benzoic acid and some chemicals from flavorings and were able to make the product more acidic, less harsh. So what this allowed them to do was to pack a higher concentration of nicotine in a much smaller space and take away a lot of the harshness that exists. It even fooled some long-term smokers when they were asked how much nicotine they thought were in these products. The pod here on your left, again resembling a Juul pod and those that look like Juul pods, is roughly the equivalent amount of nicotine as that 20 cigarette pack over there on the right. So it packs a punch. I have seen other similar pod products that have as much as 3 packs worth of cigarettes worth of nicotine in them. So again, a high concentration. In addition to products that don't look like tobacco products and look like other things and high concentrations of nicotine, we also have things, other products that help us to conceal the use. This is vaporware, and they create some backpacks as well as sweatshirts that allow you to vape through the drawstrings, where you can do it seemingly anywhere is I think what they advertise. So it's no surprise that when we looked at the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey, I started doing this work in 2017, and these Juul products really started to take off towards the end of 2017, beginning of 2018 here in Maine. And as you can see, the current use for high schoolers almost doubled in those 2 years, and the current use for middle schoolers almost doubled. And while I will say Maine's numbers are higher than the national average, we did see this nationally too. So Maine is not an outlier. Talking about the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey, we asked a question of Maine high school youth. We asked this question in 2017 as well as 2019, and I'm going to ask you all the same question. The last time, if they said that they had vaped, they were asked the question, last time you vaped, what was in the product? And I'd like you to choose the single best answer. So in a sense, what do you think is being vaped? So we have 16% of you were unsure, 11% marijuana or hash oil, 16% nicotine, and 58% just flavoring. Let's see how you did with the students' results. So I have both 2017 and 2019 here. This is when I started doing this work in 2017. When we asked that question on the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey, you'll see 8% weren't sure, 13% vaped marijuana or hash, 25% nicotine, and an overwhelming 54% thought they were just vaping flavoring. In 2019, you'll see that the unsure and the marijuana numbers didn't change a lot, but the good news is the just flavoring went down to 23%, and 56.2% of youth high schoolers knew that there was nicotine in the product. And I would say that my co-parts across the state, the tobacco prevention partners, did a lot of education in schools for both youth and adults all through 2018. And I'm hoping that this is part of what helped this to become more on the radar. Because according to sales data at that time, we knew that 99.6% of these products had nicotine in them. The only disconnect here is that a lot of students, while they know now there's nicotine in the product, they don't understand the implications of that. So there's work to do. As I mentioned, it's not a harmless water vapor, even though that's how it is sometimes marketed. There are a lot of things in the aerosol, and we're not going to cover them all today. I could probably do a session on a lot of different parts of this presentation today. So if you do have questions, I'm happy to answer them. The nicotine and lead is a little concerning because there was a study that came out in 2018 that looked at urine samples, and these were those that vaped, those that smoked, those that used both products, and those that used none. And the highest levels of heavy metals were shown to be in the urine samples of those that vaped. You remember we looked at that picture and I showed you the coil and the wick. There's a theory that these coils are made of cheap metals, and they typically are from China, I believe. And it may be flaking off because these products heat up to 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes 800 degrees Fahrenheit. And that may be causing it. We're not really sure, and more studies need to be done, but it's concerning. The ultrafine particles is another thing I want to point out. When we look at combustible tobacco products, the particles are actually much larger than the vaping particles. And why that's concerning is it means that these particles are traveling further and deeper into the lungs. And we don't know what that might do over time. In the short term, we do see inflammation. And again, that's a concern. Today, I'm going to focus on the other two things here, nicotine and flavorings, because these are things that we could be doing something about if we chose. The flavoring here, you'll see diacetyl, which is a butter flavor, has been linked to a couple decades ago. There was a outbreak of a lung injury happening at a microwave popcorn factory, and it was linked to diacetyl, which was a butter flavoring used there, and a lot of the workers ended up with permanent lung damage. At one point, it was believed there might be up to 60% of the flavors that use this diacetyl in vaping products. So that was a concern because it does combine with other flavors to create new flavors. And the nicotine, we already talked about the high concentrations, but we'll go a little deeper into that. So question, what does—
Yes, in the chat I have from Gloria. She says that she uses the program Catch My Breath, I believe of a reference to teaching children about the harms of vaping products.
Yeah, we actually had a mini grant for Catch My Breath, and were able to teach it in some of our schools that didn't have a champion at the time until they could get someone trained and ready to teach it. So excellent program, and we can connect you to that and to others if you want more information. We'll talk about that on another slide. So we have our favorite Fruit Loops here, my childhood cereal, and we also have, in case you can't see it, it's a cereal cake e-liquid. And the question is, what do these two things have in common? And much sorry to disappoint, but there is no actual fruit in Fruit Loops. I know, I was shocked too. And there's actually no cereal or cake in cereal cake e-liquid. What is there are a lot of artificial flavors and chemical combinations. And I like to remind, especially young people, that these flavors are chemicals. I will say that a lot of companies will share that their flavors and other parts of their e-liquids are food grade safe. And while that may be true, that's a little deceiving because it implies that it is safe when it's been tested and deemed safe to eat. There hasn't been any testing of these chemicals to be heated up to many hundreds of degrees and inhale deeply into the lungs. Currently, there are over 15,000 flavors. And if you look over here on the right, this is some of the packaging, which can be alarming. The one that looks like Swedish fish really resembles this. I like Swedish fish, and if I were a young person or a child, it could easily get confusing whether that's candy or something else. And because of the nicotine concentrations in these products, nicotine is actually toxic. It's used as a agricultural pesticide. And that jewel pod that I showed you earlier, which has about 50 to 60 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter in that one pod, if that's accidentally ingested, it could be life-threatening for a 150-pound adult. So even more serious for your pets and small children. So we highly recommend that these products be kept locked and away from pets and children. So I have one more poll for you today. And what I'd like you to do is, looking at this list, I'd like you to choose the one product that is not an actual e-liquid flavor. Okay. I'll tell you, earwax is winning. We have a few more to vote. You will be surprised. I actually spent some time looking for a non-e-liquid flavor, and all of these are e-liquid flavor. I even tried mud flavor, e-liquid flavor. I tried leather, e-liquid flavor, and even salt. So earwax, while it won our poll, is actually an e-liquid flavor. So just about anything you could imagine. So I am going to turn over the presentation to my co-host for the next few slides.
So just how addictive is nicotine? Well, it depends on who you ask. The tobacco industry compares nicotine addiction to a coffee addiction. However, science says that it's more addictive than alcohol. The tobacco industry compares nicotine to chocolate, yet science says that it's more addictive than cocaine. Research has shown us that nicotine is more addictive than heroin, cocaine, morphine, barbiturates, alcohol, caffeine, and marijuana. Nicotine is a highly addictive substance and the most common addiction in America. So I think it's a good place just to say that language matters when you're talking about addiction and substance use. Making sure you use first-person language helps decrease stigma around substance use, and it also makes a huge difference when engaging with someone who may have a substance use disorder. So instead of using terms like drug abuser or addict, you can try saying a person with substance use disorder. Another example, since we're talking about commercial tobacco, instead of calling someone a smoker, you could say that person smokes. First-person language shows a person has a problem rather than the person is the problem.
So language does matter. And we did ask, we were able to do some focus groups in 2020. We were able to ask some youth across Maine. And we asked them, those that said they vaped, why they vaped. What were some of the positives that they were receiving from that action. And these were their top answers. Feeling socially connected, they felt it improved focus and concentration. It was a stress reliever, a boredom reliever, helped with anxiety, and no surprise, they liked the flavors, and many felt that they were safer than cigarettes. I would add too, which isn't on the list, but many of them liked the buzz. So what's the problem? Nicotine, we're going to talk about how it actually impacts the brain. And I use this picture here to demonstrate neurotransmitters in the brain. If you picture these locks in the brain develops from the back to the front. And these neurotransmitters are the locks that release a lot of those chemicals into the reward pathways and other pathways into the brain. The locks are locked until they receive something that will unlock them, and they are naturally occurring chemicals in the brain, and they are necessary to sustain life. So some of these neurotransmitters are very easily opened by nicotine. And so when nicotine unlocks the lock, a lot happens. These are all of the naturally occurring brain chemicals that nicotine acts upon. So nicotine isn't creating these, this reaction, but it is the key that unlocks these neurotransmitters and releases a rush of all of these. A lot of dopamine. For those of you who don't remember your science, brain science class back in biology, it's sometimes called the feel-good hormone. Dopamine increases pleasure. It's for appetite suppression. Noradrenaline, which increases arousal, as does acetylcholine. Acetylcholine also improves cognitive function. Glutamate and glutamate also is for learning and memory enhancement. Serotonin helps us modulate our moods. Beta endorphin and GABA both reduce anxiety and tension. So a lot rushes in, and it happens at higher amounts than are normal. It is a flood of these chemicals. So you can see when those students are talking about the positives, that's a lot of what's going on and what's being released and what they're feeling. So again, what's the problem? Well, let's talk about what happens over time. So up here we have an example of one of those fourth generation disposable devices. These are called puff bars. So someone uses a puff bar and they ingest nicotine into their lungs. Within 7 to 10 seconds with most of these products, the nicotine unlocks those locks, and that rush of brain chemicals comes into the person's body, and they receive all of those wonderful benefits. Unfortunately, nicotine has a half-life of about 2 hours. So after an hour and a half, 2 hours, all of those levels are now dropping. You see people feeling uneasy. They have cravings. They're trying to modulate and regulate their levels, and they're starting to feel uncomfortable. And if you can picture all of the wonderful things that happen when you get a surge of those chemicals, you can imagine the opposite thing happens when those chemicals get depleted. And if nicotine isn't reintroduced, then we go into withdrawal. So there are two other important things that happen here that are important to point out. We talked about how addictive nicotine is to begin with, but nicotine also, because the body starts anticipating this rush of chemicals, it makes more nicotine receptors. So nicotine cravings increase. The body also makes less of these natural hormones. It starts to rely on the nicotine to create this surge. So what this cycle does over time is, instead of feeling that buzz that the students were mentioning they liked, it takes more and more nicotine just to feel normal. So it's an unsustainable process. without the nicotine. And you may have seen these emojis of withdrawal in your classroom. And again, if you can imagine all of these chemicals now being depleted, it can take on a lot of different reactions in the classroom. And even more so, we understand these products are new and we don't understand everything about them, but we do understand a lot about nicotine, and we especially understand nicotine in adolescence and the risks that are there. And while this slide, we talked about the brain developing from back to front, the prefrontal cortex in adolescence is not only still developing, but it's also really good at pruning. It's trying to learn things more efficiently. I like to use the analogy that it's making more main streets and fewer side streets to get where it's going. So it's really good at learning. And we know that nicotine actually impedes the growth and function of the prefrontal cortex. It reduces the activation and also inhibition controls, which are also located there. It interferes with your working memory and learning, which as an educator and attention, it's a big challenge. It has been linked to developing some psychiatric disorders. The two that are most concerning and seem to have the strongest area of concern are depression and schizophrenia. And I will say the thing that alarmed me is young people are more prone to addiction with less usage than adults. And I had the pleasure of attending a national tobacco conference and asked Dr. Nicholas Chatty, who is a pediatric specialist at Boston Children's Hospital, the question of, with these new products, how much does it take for a student to develop, a young person to develop a dependence? And his answer frightened me because according to their research, it's anywhere between half a pod and 5 pods, which is not a lot of experimentation. And we know that young people, part of their job is to take risks. And we always hope they'll take healthy risks and take risks because it helps them develop independence and grow into adults. But this is one of those experimentation pieces that can have long-term implications, even with short-term exposure. So another problem is regulations, and we'll turn it over to Athena to talk about some of these new products.
So these are oral nicotine pouches and lozenges. They're a newish category of tobacco products. They can easily be mistaken for a tin of mint, but they are nicotine products. They're somewhat similar to types of smokeless tobacco pouches that do not produce saliva, but unlike those types of smokeless tobaccos, these nicotine products on this slide, they do not contain leaf tobacco. They contain those nicotine salts that Roxanne was talking about earlier. And because they don't have the tobacco leaf in them, they are not as tightly regulated as other tobacco products in the US. The nicotine salts can contain 2 to 10 times more nicotine compared to other nicotine products. And on top of that, nicotine salt is not very researched. So there's no specific health effects that is notated from these products. And even with that, all that being said, and so much uncertainty with the health effects of these products, the Zyn nicotine pouch dollar sales in convenience stores have increased 470% in the first half year of 2020. And regulation loopholes. In 2020, the FDA restricted the sales of flavors that attracted youth for e-cigarettes that use refillable cartridges. Though this ban was intended to do good, it created a massive loophole. The policy does not cover disposable e-cigarettes or e-liquids used in some vaping devices, and the tobacco industry has taken extreme advantage of this loophole, as you can see that on the slide.
Thank you, Athena. We're always curious where students and young people are finding these products. So we did get to ask high school students where they got these products back in 2019. And while I won't go through this whole graph, the 42% at the top that they borrowed them from someone, we mentioned that there's a social connection that they get from using these products, and it's important to point out that these products are shared. And the fact that we're in a pandemic, they're not just sharing nicotine and flavors at this point, they could also be sharing some virus. So be aware that they may not own one, and parents need to know that they may not find ownership of a product, but their student may still be using a product because they're sharing and borrowing with someone else. So what can be done? We're going to talk about 3 ways that you can enter into your school community and make a difference. And one of them is probably going to be a better fit for you than others. But there is something that all of you can do, and we'll let Athena share that with you.
So the first thing that you can do is talk about substance use with the young people in your life, and nicotine does fall underneath that substance category. Over and over again, research and life experiences have shown us that when it comes to talking to youth about substances, approaches like just say no and scare tactics are ineffective and simply they don't work. So some general tips for talking about substance use with young people is just to use everyday teachable moments through life and to have continued conversations. Unfortunately, this topic is not just a one-stop shop topic. So ask the youth in your life what they think about substance use, engage them in discussions, and when they are talking, just make sure you're being a good listener. Let them finish speaking, even during areas of misperceptions. And when they're all done, then you can gently correct them. Have open and honest conversations, say what you mean and mean what you say, and make sure you are equipped with information. I know for myself, my 6-year-old daughter loves to fact check me on just about everything and anything that she can. So when you have these conversations, be prepared. Maintain a balance of information with both positive and negative reinforcement. So when you're having these conversations, don't just focus on the harms that can come from substance abuse. Make sure that you're reinforcing how much these young people mean to you. Talking about substance use can be tough, so just remember to come from a place of love and care and use that person first language. And lastly, set a positive example and walk your talk.
And you all are here today, and we're hopefully giving you some of those facts that you may not have known to go forward with. I'm going to talk about entry level number 1. We're going to talk a little bit about policy. All of the schools in our district have a tobacco policy, and the important part is it sets the expectations for the entire school community. I will point out that the Partnership for Health is completing an independent, rigorous study of your local tobacco partners and their relationships with their schools. And I will share that final evaluation with you at the district level when I get it. But I do want to point out that there was a very strong independent study that showed that the more a school interacted with their district tobacco prevention partner, the higher their tobacco policy scores were and their enforcement scores. And as a former school board member, I highly recommend that your policy be a working document. Unfortunately, at a lot of times it's sheets of paper in a binder on a bookshelf. But if you're not familiar with your policy and what it should be doing, it is located in the ABC section of your school board policies, which you should be able to find on your website. It needs to meet, at least at minimum, meet federal and state law. And I will say our state law changed in September of 2019 to include the prohibition of all vaping products on all school grounds by everyone. Before it allowed vaping products by those that were old enough to purchase. That is no longer. So it does need to meet that new law's requirement. There's also an ABC-R section, and this usually explains how the policy is communicated and enforced. In a nutshell, it explains who does what. And we recommend that you look at and make sure, we've talked about equitable learning today in a lot of your sessions, and it's important that your policy be equitable as well. Is it meeting students' needs where they're at, and providing them with the resources that they need? And obviously we can help guide you through this. We've worked with a lot of our partners to make sure that it meets their school community needs and also meets state law. We can also provide free signage, which is a great way to communicate your policy and also remind people as a deterrent what can and cannot be done in that environment. Prevention is a second place. This may be your spot to enter. And it is teaching healthy coping and refusal skills. Someone earlier mentioned Catch My Breath. Does a really good job at age appropriate levels because the curriculum is age appropriate to help students and young people be armed with refusal skills and also healthy coping skills. Whenever I do this work, I like to point out that while we saw 29% of high schools with current users, that's a reminder that over 70% are not. And we like to make sure that there's a balance of what are those 70% doing to cope and what's working for them. And it's a big part of our prevention efforts. We can connect you to age-appropriate curriculum. We even have education available both online and in person for parents. There's a parent hotline. If a parent finds that their student has violated the policy and they know nothing about vaping, you can connect them with some great resources to help explain what vaping is, where they can actually talk to someone, ask questions. We also have an online curriculum if they'd rather just go through the course and understand what's going on. Peer-to-peer opportunities, we have a program called Psychics, because we also know that young people speak to each other a lot and share information. And the Psychics program is a great way to teach skills to young people like open-ended questioning and reflective listening and a lot of those important motivational interviewing skills so they can help walk their peers through some tough times, but also recognize when they need to involve an adult. And again, we're a big part of what we do, mostly virtually now, is to equip young people, staff, faculty, administrators, and parents with actual information. I can't mention all of the prevention curriculum and options we have, but I will point out that EverFi has a new course called Vaping Know the Truth, and they are giving away free scholarships. I put the information here, and my slides will be shared in a folder for you later, so don't worry about writing it down. But the deadline is April 16th, and their focus is really on the environment. You mentioned these disposable items becoming more prolific, and there's a big concern because when we ask students, the Truth Initiative did a survey and asked students what they were doing with their product when they were done with it. It is ending up in the regular trash, regular recycling, and unfortunately, if they don't know what to do with it, they're throwing it on the ground. So if you have students who are environmentalists and concerned about the environmental impact, it's a great way to incorporate that type of learning in your curriculum. The last part, you may be a school nurse or someone, a counselor who works with the care model and work in adolescent treatment. And we have some support for you as well. We know that your job, first and foremost, is recognizing and assessing whether there is a dependence to a substance. And I put in the folder a nicotine assessment that's been shown to be very good at addressing vaping dependence as well as regular nicotine smoking dependence in the folder. It's called Hooked on Nicotine, so you can go in there and look for that. If you're not currently using something or you're not sure with what you're using, is best practice. And we do have alternatives to suspension available to inform parents. And I mentioned the other options of being the call hotline as well as the online curriculum that's specifically to address and bring parents in as part of the care team. And there are a lot of free resources. I will say with adolescents, they are not just little adults. We do know, though, that the counseling has shown to double quit rates in teens, so that is a positive. Maine has the Maine Quit Link, which is an online web-based portal, which gives all kinds of different options for how you want your treatment to look like. It is free to Maine residents. I will mention NRT is on here for those of you that do treatment. Nicotine replacement therapy has been found to be safe, but there's not really a strong evidence of its effectiveness in regards to quit rate. It is prohibited for those under 18, but it can be used by at a provider's discretion. So if you see a student youth that you were working with who has a strong dependence, have them reach out to their provider, and that may be an option to help ease their transition as they move to nicotine free. We also know that students, young people, like to text. I'm always shocked if I get a FaceTime or a call from my 3 young adults. Most of the time it's a text. And Maine has partnered with the Truth Initiative and their This Is Quitting program. You can text Maine to 88709 and be connected with a tobacco specialist, treatment specialist, who will help guide them through a treatment plan that is text-based and give them appropriate text messages. And it has shown to be have strong positive outcomes. It started at the Truth Initiative, I think, in 2018. So you can also, I can share that study with you if you want to take a look. So 3 different areas where you may be able to make a difference, either policy, prevention, and care. We have also put in the folder a partnership agreement, which lists a lot of the things that the whole department here at Bangor Public Health can help you with. Please feel free to reach out and check the boxes and send it to us, and we'll meet you where you're at. I will say that the tobacco prevention program has many grants available. This is the 5th year of a 5-year grant, and those mini grants need to be spent before June 30th, and I would prefer that they get spent in our community if at all possible. So if money is an issue, please reach out to us, and we will work with you to help you and meet your needs. We are at question time. And we have 3 minutes. Any questions, Athena?
No, there's no questions in the chat.
Like I said, this is my contact information that will all be in the folder, as well as a PDF of the slide. I hope you enjoy this last day of winter and you enjoy the first day of spring tomorrow. It's supposed to be nice and warm. So have a great time, and thank you for joining us today.